Sometimes, when you return from a deployment, you bring back more than you can carry on your own. You may come back to more than you think you can handle. Whether you're feeling depressed, anxious, or overwhelmed, Military Pathways can help lighten your load. Through our anonymous online self-assessment, Military Pathways can help you get a clearer picture of how you're feeling and whether you could benefit by talking to a healthcare professional. As you transition from the front lines to the home front, help can be a click away. Visit steptohealing.org for your free anonymous online screening. Military Pathways. Take the first step to healing.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Veterans Voices, a monthly talk show focusing on veterans issues. Today, our topic is post-war stress in daily life. My name is Nathan Johnson. Due to technical difficulties, we will be joining our interview already in progress. This is our second live show produced here at CCTV's studio in Martinez. Non-cable subscribers can watch online live at ContraCostaTV.org. This program is funded by CalVet. Veterans Voices is an outreach grant-funded program to provide opportunities for veterans to access resources from the VA and the community. In fact, the grant requires assessment of the outreach we provide to veterans and their families. Because of this, we really need your help. You can do so by watching every month, engaging with us by phone, email, or chat during the show, and even telling others about the show. But most importantly, this is your show, a program for you in Contra Costa County. Our website is www.contracostatv.org/Veterans Voices. On the website, you can see the latest episode and previous shows, and you can ask your questions or leave comments. There's a calendar of upcoming events on our next show and topics. We'll keep you posted on current veterans community events as well. Our guests are accomplished authors who have recently published books about their experiences of war. Their experiences span more than 30 years, from Vietnam to Iraq. Joe Callaway entered the United States Army in 1965. Graduating from OCS, he served in Vietnam from 1966 to 1968. He lives in California with his wife and 3 sons. Also joining us is Bob Whitworth, who was drafted into the Army in 1967 at the age of 20. He served in Vietnam for 1 year, and he received the Purple Heart. So now, let's join the show already in progress. And Joe, you were in Vietnam about the same time. How'd you end up in the Army?
Well, I was going to get drafted. I'd been kicked out of college about 3 times, and so I knew I was going to be drafted. So I enlisted for missile school. I figured I'd go down to Fort Bliss, have a good time down there, go across the border down in Juarez, and then end up going to Germany and spending 3 years in Germany. But I got sidetracked along the way. Somehow I wound up, the Army asked me if I wanted to go to OCS, and I took that option, and I wound up in Vietnam. So.
Now OCS, that's Officers Candidate School. That's where they really take you and train you to be a leader. You're actually in charge of an infantry unit, are you?
Yes, I did. I had an infantry platoon in Vietnam. When I was in basic training, they gave me the option of 3 selections, either engineering, artillery, or infantry. I asked them if there was guaranteed my selection. They said, well, no, it's just kind of it just depends on how lucky you are. So anyway, I selected engineering, artillery, and infantry, and then of course I wound up in the infantry. So.
When did you go over to Vietnam, Joe?
Well, I went to Vietnam in November of 1966, and I actually took a train from Fort Riley, Kansas, with my infantry platoon to the Oakland port here. And first time I saw the Bay Bridge and Golden Bridge was from the bottom up. So I looked up and saw the Golden Gate Bridge. It was quite an experience.
Yeah, I bet it was quite an experience for both of you, training in a place like Hawaii and ended up in Vietnam, or leaving out of the Bay Area on a ship and heading to a place that neither of you had ever been to before, and about to face something that that maybe you weren't quite prepared for. Did you feel like you were prepared? Did you do a lot of training that got you ready to go into war in Vietnam?
Well, I guess I started out with obviously basic training, then I went on to AIT, then I went to OCS, so it took me a year of training before I was ready to go to Vietnam, but I wasn't prepared at all for Vietnam. I had no idea whatsoever as to what my responsibilities were going to be. I just knew I was in charge of 42 men, and I had to do the best job I could to take care of their lives. So.
How about you, Bob? Did you feel that they had trained you enough to be prepared for what you were going to, not only prepared for the combat, but prepared for everything else that went along with being in another country?
I had no idea what it took to be prepared. You know, we were coming alongside of each other. We'd been trained, which was excellent because we learned discipline and things like that, and how to follow orders, what have you. But once we got to Vietnam and we stepped outside that wire, the rules changed. We had to figure out how to stay alive in different situations. We had orders to obey, and we had to get those orders followed and done, but at the same time we had to stay alive. And that got pretty tricky. There was a lot of danger there that I had never even comprehended before. And it was frightening, and I had to learn how to push into my fears, even though I was scared. And after a while, it began to slow down a little bit. It wasn't so bad, but then we'd hit a hard spot, and it'd come back. So it was a changing, continually changing, revolving door about what was happening in a very deadly time.
Well, I just want to reintroduce for everyone tonight that we have Bob Whitworth and Joe Callaway tonight, and tonight's topic is serving in war and readjusting from coming home. And so, Vietnam, you both were very young. You must have been 20 years old, maybe younger, maybe 22. This is a very delicate time in your life in which you're learning a lot of things from your parents and from school. But Vietnam must be a learning experience as well.
Well, what happened to me is I just had to learn kind of OJT. It was not something that I was really prepared for, so I just tried to use good common sense. I think initially I was very gung-ho, and then I learned to listen to my NCOs, and through experience I was able to survive. But my battalion suffered 349 casualties in the 3 years they were in the field. So it's KIA, that's not just including WIAs.
Yeah, a lot of acronyms that we're using, and so you mean KIAs are those who were killed in action, right, or WIs are those who were wounded in action. So that's a lot of loss, and of course, you know, we kind of see that in the movies. We see people dying and people being killed and people being wounded, but those are the things that you experience at a young age firsthand in a place like Vietnam. Where did your experiences in Vietnam take you?
Actually, I learned a lot from Vietnam. I learned how to appreciate bravery. I learned to appreciate hope. I learned to appreciate having faith. I learned to appreciate believing in myself and the men that I was with. I was very thankful that I was with a group of men that I thought were talented and steady, and that I could count on them. And at times, the mix changed. It all depended on how bad the heat was. I mean, learning to go on an all-night ambush is absolutely terrifying. And so you got to figure it out. You know, there's snakes. What if too many guys come down the road? What are you going to do then? You know, and so the learning curve was extreme. Yeah. But we did learn fast. Because if we didn't learn fast, we weren't going to be there anymore.
Right. And when you came home, Bob, how was it to readjust? How difficult was it for you to go from those long nights of hypervigilance to trying to reacclimate with your family and your friends?
Well, at first I actually didn't know that it was as different as it was, because we were there one day, we were home the next. And the press was beating us up pretty bad, so they didn't care much for us, and so we weren't accepted with open arms. Mm-hmm. But we'd been used to not being liked. Mm-hmm. So we just entered into that process. My wife, who I got married after a month after I got home, she was an absolute jewel. She, from the time when I'd left, I'd known her before, and when I came home, she said, you know, there's been some real change here. And I had to really give it to her that she had the ability to step back and let me be who I was, because I was still a soldier that had come home. And I was still prepared with, you know, the instincts of jumping, you know, out of the way, or rifle shots or something like that. That took a long time to get over. And one of the worst things that I didn't expect was the nightmares. That just came out of the blue, and it was like, my goodness, I never expected it, and they wouldn't quit. And she,
Your wife?
my wife, yeah, she cared about me, and she had to put up with this strange situation that was developing right there in our home, like the war wasn't over. And but at the same time, because we had taken an attitude that we can do it, we can reach our objective, and we just had that push until you make it attitude, that's the way I believe that I had to function now. But what I was missing, that I didn't realize I'd been robbed of, was compassion and tenderness. So now I read people differently, and it was actually a robbery. I didn't have that compassion, and I lost some richness because of that. But at the same time, I had hope that I'd figured this out. But it took a long time for me to even realize that I didn't have that.
Joe, your experience was a little different than that. You came back and immediately had a different path. Why don't you share that with us?
Well, when I came back, I was with the 10 Special Forces, so I had a year of transition back in the United States, CONUS, and then I went back to college after that. So I had spent about 2.5 years in college getting my degree. So, but it was in Boston. It was during the riots, and it was an unusual experience for me. I think a lot of the younger people showed a bit of respect for me based on my experience. So I was also a lot bigger than I am now, built a little differently. So I didn't get hassled a lot, but I did enjoy that transition period of almost 3.5 years, really, if you look at it. So I didn't come back just like Bob did.
I feel compelled to acknowledge something right at this point, and that is that, you know, I just missed the war. I graduated from high school, the war was over, but I want to tell you, thank you to both you, and thank you to all our Vietnam veterans for your service, because that's a black mark in our history. The way you guys were treated when you came home was an absolute black mark in your history. And I've come to know so many great guys that were Vietnam vets, and I just want to acknowledge that and thank you for your service and welcome you home. And you know, I can't apologize for a country, but I'm ashamed of the way we treated our military in that era.
Yeah, you know, Kevin, you mentioned that, and I didn't live through that time period. You know, that's not an experience that I lived through, and so I've only heard that from the Vietnam veterans and from the people that lived during that time. And you know, I just want to remind folks that they have an opportunity to call in this evening and ask questions or make comments pertaining to tonight's topic. We have Bob Whitworth again and Joe Callaway, who have both written books. Bob wrote a book called Through My Eyes, a story of hope, and Joe wrote a book called Mekong First Light, both excellent books that are available for folks who want to read them. And you know, you talk about being a soldier, and you talk about how compassion and these other things that you felt like you had lost. You know, when I think of a soldier, and I didn't serve in the Army, I served in the Marine Corps, but I would imagine the Marine Corps and the Army are a lot alike in that element of being a Marine, being a soldier. You have to turn some things off in order to really kind of survive and stay focused. What things did you find that were still turned on when you came home that maybe were a little bit more of a challenge when you were back in the United States?
Well, I think that certainly I had a bit of anger. My wife will attest to that. It was very difficult for me, and I didn't realize at the time. It took me years and years and years to figure it out. I actually came into the Concord Vet Center back in 1989. My wife asked me to come in, and they told me that I had PTSD, and I told them they're crazy. And then I wound up coming back like 10 years later. So, but I was definitely felt that the stress of war had a tremendous impact on my life. And it took me years and years to correct that. I've done a lot better. In recent years, Bob and I both went through a 2-year program over at the Contra Vet Center for kind of readjustment training, if you will. And it was a terrific experience, I think, for me, and I think Bob feels the same way, don't you, Bob?
Yes, it was. The Concord Vet Center really did a lot for me. There was a place there that I found men that had the same types of experience that I did. And I remember one of the first questions I asked was, how do you guys sleep? And they all started laughing at me, and they said, what sleep? And it was a great relief to know that I wasn't the only one that were being chased through the jungles in my dreams.
Right.
And it was pretty good to be able to come alongside men that knew that I could trust and that I could lay some of this out.
And I want to just mention that the vet center you're referring to in Concord is also a national program, part of the VA, vetcenter.va.gov. And looks like we got a caller, so we'll roll to, look at this, Chuck from Chicago. I assume that's not Chicago, California. So Chuck, welcome from Chicago. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, how are you?
Great, thanks Chuck. How can we help you?
Well, I'm good friends with Bob. I served in the same company he did in Vietnam, Delta 4th through the 21st. And I was just, hearing these guys talk about how it was when they got home as an individual. I landed at O'Hare Field on July 20th, 1969, and walked off where the jet landed and walked out the thing, and the guy come over to me and spit at me, called me a baby killer, and I punched him. And, one of those things, I was like, what's going on? What is going on? It doesn't make any sense to me. And, I met Bob again in 2003 at a a company reunion. And bottom line is, he turned me on to, why I act like I act, and, maybe you need help. So, just letting you know. So, good seeing you, Bob. I'll see you sometime at a reunion or something. I don't want to take up your time.
Hey, great, Chuck.
Thank you, guys.
Hey, Chuck, thanks for joining us. And that's fantastic that Chuck, that you joined us from Chicago and that you shared your story. And I mean, what an ideal opportunity on this show to have 2 Vietnam veterans talking about their stories, and to have someone call in and share their story as well. And it happens to be the same story. I shouldn't say the same story, but it happens to be a similar story to yours, Bob, because you guys served together.
Yes, we did.
I know it was a difficult time for you both, and you mentioned the vet center helping you out, and Chuck mentioned having a difficult time transitioning. How do you see that your books or that your experiences have helped you in helping other veterans? I just want to preface this a little bit better, that I know that the both of you have actually served actively as mentors in the Vet Center program that you mentioned before, but others have read your book from your own units maybe, or maybe complete strangers have read your book and then contacted you. So how have you been able to help others through telling your story?
Well, let me mention first, thanks for calling, Chuck. It's good to hear from you, and it was good to see you back in early 2000. The book has been encouraging to me. It cost me a lot to write. I thought it would be something that would help me release, but it didn't. Took me at least 4 years to get it to this stage. But the thing that I believe that this does is this provides encouragement. We come along, other men see, they read my story, and actually the women read it. I get a lot of comments from wives because now they see, because it's very hard for us to tell these stories. And actually the hard ones we very, very seldom tell. But the wives need to know. The children need to know. My son really never understood what my job was as an infantry soldier. So I put it in pretty plain, simple speaking. A lot of men quit reading in their late 20s, and so I put it together in short chapters.
A story easy enough for everyone to read.
Yeah, for everyone to read. Yeah. And that's encouraging to me, because I get phone calls and people say, thank you for writing the book. I didn't understand that.
That's good.
It's helping me.
In the minute we have left here, Joe, what can you tell us about how your book has touched other lives?
Well, I've gotten hundreds and hundreds of letters and phone calls from people throughout the country. I've gotten all types of feedback on it, just as Bob said, from families that were able to use the book as a tool to explain the war, or for soldiers to explain the war to their families. So that's been really probably the most rewarding experience I've had from writing the book. It was also cathartic for me because when I had all this in my head, and then once I wrote it, it just kind of went away. And so every now and then I have to look in the book to see what I did. So,
what you were thinking, huh?
yeah.
Read your own book, basically. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. And gentlemen, we really enjoyed having you on here tonight. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Joe, for sharing some of your story and for sharing your stories in the book.
Well, you know, one other thing that happened to me is I got involved with the Vietnam Veterans of Diablo Valley. And that has been another transition for me, another group, an organization which has helped me blend back into the community, feel comfortable. It's been a great organization, and I recommend it to anybody in this area.
The theme I'm hearing here is ask for help. Look for somebody that can give you a hand up, give you a hand and that you can relate to, and ask for help.
Whether it's the Vet Center or
Vietnam
Vietnam Vets of Diablo Valley, a local veterans organization we have here. Well, we're going to roll to a break real quickly here. We have a video segment to share with everyone. Our veteran profile today is on a local photographer, Dottie, who uses her skills as a healing process to her war experiences. We will be back after this short video.
So I went to Iraq in 2003. I was there at Camp Cropper by the airport. The biggest job I had in Iraq was don't die. And then coming home and having to decide what to eat, what to wear, when to eat, when I was going to do this, when I was going to do that. And it was tough. And I never really gave myself time to really transition. I just went straight from going to Baghdad, going home, and then going back to work. It really hit home after a couple of years that I wasn't the same person that went. I was really down, and didn't want to do anything, so I picked up a camera and started to try to walk around again to help get me out of the house, and to help me learn and grow and help me really put things back together. Yeah, if there was anything I could tell veterans that wants to find an outlet, I tell them whether they like cooking, writing, photography, anything, go out there and explore it and share it with someone, because it could inspire someone, it could help someone.
We're back in the studio. Just want to remind everyone to call us or email us. Be sure to visit the website, contracostatv.org/Veterans Voices. I'm joined here by Zach Bass. Zach is also an author. He's an Iraq War veteran, an infantryman. And Zach, I want to welcome you to the show as well. It's great to have someone representing the current generation. You and I just met each other about a month ago. Very impressed with the book that you wrote. I had a chance to read it. It reflects your experiences that you had directly in Ramadi in Iraq in 2006. So thank you for taking the chance just to join us and again share your story with our audience in hopes that maybe other Iraq, Afghanistan veterans are watching, or maybe their family members are watching, or just maybe someone who is interested in supporting Iraq and Afghanistan vets who are coming home.
Let me ask you this, Zach. What was it that led you to write the book?
I had a story to tell, much like we all do, and it was something I couldn't communicate with, counselors at the VA, with civilian friends that I had, and the phones over time became heavy between people that I deployed with, back and forth, and we didn't want to take each other's calls because it's reminders of a really tough time in our life. And so I needed to put it somewhere, and I've always been a fan of writing since I was a child, and so I put it on paper, and it just happened to work out for me.
And Zach, you talk about a difficult time in your life, and reading your book, it sounds like you've had actually quite a few difficulties in your life. And do you feel that at all any of those difficulties? You mentioned in your book, if you don't mind, that your parents were deceased when you were at a young age. And do you feel that any of those experiences influenced your wanting to join the military?
I don't know if any of it had something to do with me wanting to join the military, except maybe by some stretch of a long mile. I grew up through the foster care system in the state of Texas. Didn't really have a real guiding light of, you know, what a young adult male should be.
Right.
When I turned 18, I joined the military when I was 19. When I was 18, foster care kicks you out, and it made a lot of horrible, really horrible choices, life choices at that moment.
Again, mentioning being young again, right? We talked to Bob and Joe
making
about being
your own
young.
mistakes. I just didn't have that really, you know, that father, you know, son sort of influence to teach me, hey, you know, this is right and this is wrong. And nor did I have a sense of what family, you know, was, or what that dynamic even looked like. So, you know, when I joined the Army, that really accomplished all of that for me.
Yeah,
Gave
you
me
wrote
the
about
family
that.
dynamic and the discipline.
Right.
And I very much needed that.
Yeah, so the Army became your family. You wrote about that in the book,
Right.
and you had kind of the parental roles of maybe your squad leaders, your sergeants or your staff sergeants, and so you bonded with this new family. And did you guys train as a family before you went to Iraq? How close did you get even before your war experiences, or did you not yet really know each other?
Oh, we bonded. We bonded really well. We trained 9 months out of the year in Hohenfeld and Grafenwehr in Germany, 4 deployments, and a lot of time. You spend a lot of time with the men out in the field, getting cold, getting close,
Right. Yeah.
complaining about the same things, and building camaraderie out of hating life.
Right. Right.
It's a good bonding experience and very character building.
Yeah, kind of the worst times kind of become the things that you laugh about
Yeah,
later on, right?
things you miss.
It's kind of like, man, remember that miserable time?
Exactly.
You remember when this sucked this bad? And that's the things that you actually kind of connect over, right? Not knowing it at the time, that those are the moments that kind of bring you together.
Yep.
So how long were you in before you had your first deployment into the Middle East?
Year and a half.
Yeah, I've heard from many soldiers that I've spoken to that they trained and they trained and they trained, and then you just wanted to go. Did you feel that way? You trained up to deploy, and it was just you just wanted to go and do your job?
Interestingly, I don't know. I went back and forth with the idea. You know, I worked with men who had, you know, these stories and friendships that I really knew nothing of the dynamic because it was forged in war. You know, and so most of what I had at the time was very superficial. You know, beyond the training and you know, stuff of the nature. But I mean, for the most part, yeah, I definitely, you know, did want to go, but it wasn't you know, what I expected. But I mean, overall, it's definitely appreciated.
It wasn't what you expected once you got there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, sort of all of it.
I just want to take a second just to reintroduce Zach Bass. Zach is a Iraq War Army infantryman, wrote a book about his experience in Iraq, and I want to remind viewers that they can phone in to the show tonight and ask questions, make comments. Unfortunately, our chat service is not working tonight. However, we are monitoring emails, so you can send us your questions or your comments on email. We are live tonight. This is Monday, August 18th. It's about 7:30 in the evening. We are live. You can ask your questions by email tonight. Zach, you know, you ended up in Ramadi, Iraq in 2006.
Right.
Very difficult place to be. You faced a lot of challenges. You were in extreme heat. You were facing an enemy sometimes that wasn't exactly wearing a uniform like you were. What gave you the strength, or what gave you the drive to make it through to the end and come back home?
It's somewhat of a difficult question, but I'm happy to answer. You know, I honestly believe a lot of it was, you know, you wanted to see the men you worked with, your brothers, you know, get home alive.
Right.
And honestly, honestly for me, you know, at some point I had given up the idea of coming home and anything other than, you know, a box draped in a flag, and then that it made me incredibly effective at my job, and all that mattered to me was my brothers getting home.
Yeah, you wrote about that in your book. You wrote about having to come to the...
It's quite a concept.
Yeah. And nothing that any of the training in the Army could probably prepare you for, right?
I've never read of or heard of anything, like that before.
Yeah. So you make this conscious decision. I may not come home. In fact, accepting the fate that you may come home as a casualty, like Joe pointed out, someone who's killed in action.
Right.
That what matters most to you are your brothers and their safety, their security. Right. Yeah. And so you operate as a unit, and you eat together, you clean your rifles together, you go on patrols together, you sit in the same buildings. Bob mentioned night ambushes. Did you guys have a chance to ever talk about what was going on during any of these moments? I mean, as you're sitting there eating chow, eating food, or sitting in an outpost late at night, did you guys ever have a chance to kind of talk about what's going on here and how are you feeling and what did you think about what happened last week? Any chance to kind of process the experience in Iraq?
To be honest, no. I mean, the times we had to talk about things was after a mission, after something, and our after actions review. That was about it.
Yeah.
We lived in Indian country, went back for a 4-hour refit every, I don't know, it seemed like 2 to 3 weeks. And you would rotate between what part of the platoon went. So not really. There was no time to decompress. There's no contact really with the outside world. Right. And really, I think for me that was better because, and maybe for a lot of the other guys as well, because it became a distraction, of sorts. But was there a time to sit down and talk about things? I mean, there was planning because the mission was kind of special, and we were in the center of the city. With a population of 400,000. About everybody wanted to kill you. And we pushed into an area that the Marines, 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, and the Army Reserve Unit that, we were taking over, didn't want to push into because it was such a deadly place.
Wow.
And we kicked these people out and gave them IOUs.
Yeah.
And it became our streets that we, patrolled on foot, day and night. Twice a day.
Sounds like you had to maintain your focus constantly.
Yeah.
You didn't have a chance to kind of drop your pack and relax. I mean, you had to always think about the next area of operation or the next door that you were going to be kicking in, or how the enemy was thinking about those same things.
It's an asymmetric warfare.
Yeah. Zach, we're really glad that you're back home.
Thank you.
And that you are alive. And that you did not come back as a casualty, in a sense of you did not come back killed, and so coming back is very difficult though, right? And so there are still casualties of war that are still living, right? And did your readjustment or your coming home or whatever you want to call it, getting off the plane and having a cold beer, whatever that was to you. How was it difficult, or how was it any different than maybe what you had expected?
I don't know what I expected. However, I can tell you what it was like. A long phase of disaster, and everything in my life, personal choices, relationships. I'm doing okay now, but what it took to get here was, many failed interpersonal relationships, a failed marriage, destroying great friendships. It's just been really hard, and I think one of the incredibly important things to point out is finding a sense of purpose again. Because for me, that's what provides a little bit of happiness every morning when I wake up, is having that sense of purpose again. Because you go from doing these awesome things with great men, for a legitimate real world mission. And then you come back and you're sitting in a living room or on a couch, hearing, some dude complain about, I don't know. I mean, like somebody ate all my cereal.
Right.
Yeah, and specifically because, how old were you when you, 19?
Yeah.
So you didn't have that life experience to come back and know what to adjust to. And I think that's such a common theme with especially the Iraqi and OAF guys.
Yeah.
Because they came right out of school, they went right from their homes, for most of them, directly into being told what to do, when to do it, how to do it,
Right.
did a great job doing it, had a purpose.
Yeah.
And we see this all the time with the veterans that we work with Cal Vet, that it's so difficult now to have an identity. And I think you just nailed it on the head for a lot of our listeners out there from that era, to know, what do I do now? How do I create value for myself?
Create some friendships, you know, find something and expand upon that. Because we all got to start somewhere. You got to walk before you run.
Has anyone helped you with that? I mean, any person or any organization, or how have you helped yourself even?
The VAs intermittently, you know, helped me as much as they could. You know, the Concord Vet Center, I'm linked up with them, and what I find really neat is my counselor. He was a Marine, also an infantryman, and was in the Battle of Fallujah. You know, got out of the military, went to college, then you know, went to Berkeley, got his Master of Social Work, and now I'm one of his patients. When does that happen ever? A grunt talking to a grunt.
Yeah, you're talking about Mike Ergo. You're talking about a counselor at the Concord Vet Center, and we know Mike very well.
Absolutely.
And so Mike has been able to help you, and have any others helped you, or is there anything maybe that you've connected or grounded yourself to? Maybe perhaps writing your book or sharing your story.
Not so much, you know, the book. Definitely sharing my story, but. You know, one of the things that helps me immensely is some of the friendships, you know, that I've built. Honestly, it's been, you know, post separation, you know, with my wife. You know, but you know, pre-separation, I didn't know how to do anything but sit in my room or sit in, you know, my living room, you know, in my apartment or house, whatever, and be a recluse.
Just sit there isolated.
So it's connecting, you know,
Absolutely.
Connecting with.
For help.
Yeah. And even if you don't ask for help, just connecting, you know, because what connected me is I started going to, you know, the school in a veterinary technician program, and, you know, didn't really know if I wanted to be there, but I was there. And through that, I met all these incredible people that I started networking with, and eventually we built a bond and they became my friends.
That's great. You know, Zach, I really appreciate you being on the show tonight, and you've helped us connect, you know, to the story of an Iraq War veteran and what an Iraq War veteran really goes through and who an Iraq War vet really is. Really appreciate you being on the show tonight.
Thank you.
Veterans can call in with questions, and we'll continue to receive your calls during our break. We will be back in a minute.
Thanks, buddy. Nice job.
Welcome home, man.
We're back live in the Contra Costa TV studio. If you're just tuning in, our topic today is post-war stress and daily life. Our special guest is a family member, Monica. Thank you for being here tonight. It's wonderful to have you on the show. She will share her experience of coping through challenges of a family member who went to war. Monica, again, you know, not a lot of opportunities have been had for spouses to get to share their stories and what they go through in supporting the veteran, but really who they are and what support they find through others or through resources, or what kind of strengths really allow them to be the caregiver in some situations. So you started this. We've been talking about how young these things happen in people's lives, and you know, you are young, and my understanding is that Brian, your spouse, who was a Marine in Iraq in 2007, that the two of you knew each other as early as high school.
Yes, we dated 2002. It was right after our freshman year. We started dating through senior year, and we were just inseparable. Before that, we were just normal teenagers, worrying about teenager things, school, each other, friends. And towards the middle of senior year, he just decided to enlist.
Into the Marine Corps.
Into the Marine Corps.
Did you ever think that you, however, when he enlisted, did you ever think that maybe that was an enlistment for you and that you were eventually going to end up as a military spouse? Or?
Honestly, I didn't know. I really didn't know where our future was going to take us together. I just knew that that's what he wanted to do, and I supported him through it. But as far as us being together and as a spouse, a spouse of a veteran, I really didn't know what to expect, I guess.
Yeah. Yes. Very young time in your life.
Yeah, we were only 18, 19 years old, I guess.
Wow.
It wasn't a thought yet.
And you both grew up here locally in the Bay Area, in Antioch, actually, right?
Yeah,
and went to high
East
school
Bay
at one
Area.
of the local high schools here. And so eventually he ended up leaving and going off into the Marine Corps and saying goodbye. And what was that like for you? Because you stayed behind. I mean, everyone sees the Marine or the soldier going to war, but what was the picture like of the person who stayed behind?
Honestly, there's a lot of things that I don't remember, but I remember that. I remember the day, not vaguely, but I remember driving him to the recruiting station on Concord and dropping him off there. And during our senior year, we connected more than we ever have in high school. We kind of secluded our friends, kept to each other, and when he decided to leave, it was just heartbreaking. I was working at Starbucks, and after he left, I was just I felt to myself. I felt alone. You know, I had my parents and my sister and my family, but we were always together, and it was it was heartbreaking.
Yeah, I would imagine. And he's going off into the Marine Corps, and he's going to train hard, and he's going to be a rifleman. And at this point, the war in Iraq and Afghanistan were already happening. I mean, they've been happening for a couple of years at this point. And what were your thoughts on whether Brian was ever going to end up in war, and you know, what was he going to end up doing there? What was his job? And you know, was he going to come home, and those sort of thoughts?
Well, I knew he was going to war. I knew it was happening. It was going on. I just didn't know I didn't know fully what his job entailed. I didn't know what he was physically going to be doing. So I kind of went in blind. So honestly, I wasn't as scared as I thought I was going to be. I mean, I had a lot of questions for him right before he left. Was he scared? I know that I was scared for him, but I just wasn't sure of the extent of what he was going to be doing there.
How was it while he was gone, Monica? I mean, were you able to communicate much, or how did that go?
We wrote letters as often as we could, but of course they never got there on time, so our conversations never really matched up. He called when he could through a sat phone.
Wow. That must have been really unique, huh? I mean, to all of a sudden get a phone call from the middle of Iraq.
It was, I mean, the connection wasn't always great, but I mean, he would call when he could, and I just remember he was very vague. He didn't really explain a lot. And before Iraq and before he enlisted, we talked to each other about everything, and we were always talking about everything. And when he would call from Iraq, I remember it was completely vague. He couldn't say anything to me. And
what things did you say? Did you ask a lot of questions, or did you tell him?
Well, the minimal
what was going
time
on
that
back
we
here?
did have to speak, I would like to. I kind of didn't say what was going on with me. I kind of wanted to know what was going on with him. Asking him what was going on. Are you okay? What are you doing? Where are you? And he would
Already
just
that
always say
caregiver role, right?
I
That's
guess,
all about you, and are you okay?
It's my mom and me, I guess. I mean, I take after my mom. I was concerned, asked a lot of questions as much as I could, but he would always tell me he was fine, and he'll call me when he could, and I just left it that way. I mean, I really couldn't pull the answer out of him, you know. I didn't want to be a distraction to him either, so we just kept our conversation short.
Now, my understanding, may be a little incorrect, but you guys actually disconnected for a little period of time, and then reconnected. Where were you at in your life, and where was he at in his life when you guys reconnected?
Reconnected. We reconnected into, well, I would say the phone conversations were off and on through 07, 08-ish. We did disconnect. We started dating other people. I mean, we were young, so we decided to separate. But if he called, I would answer. We kept the friendship going. We knew that we still wanted to be friends, at least as much as we could.
He was home from Iraq.
And
at
this was
point.
between deployments, I guess? Huh?
I don't know.
Well, it was one deployment.
Okay.
06, 07. He was actually injured January 17th, 2007.
Oh, okay.
In Iraq. And I just, well, if you like, if I can go back to that event, I just remember our conversations had stopped for a long time. And I did get a phone call, random phone number, automatically knew it was him just because it's a random area code. And he called me really, really late and told me that he was injured. He told me he got shot in the face. This is, well, from what I remember, he had said, I got shot in the face. I'll call you when I can. And I said, okay. And that's the last thing I remember. And it was in the middle of the night. And my automatic instinct, I guess, was, well, we weren't dating, but my automatic instinct was, what can I do for his parents? Because I know that they didn't know yet. I mean, from now he tells me that I was the first person that he called, so my instinct was I need to get in contact with them. I haven't spoken to them in years, but I did. And since then, that's when the phone calls started to, we started to try to get in contact a little bit more. We still stayed friends, dating other people, but yeah, after that, it was 2009, we started to reconnect more. Phone calls started picking back up. And I just remember at that time in my life, I still felt lonely. I mean, I had friends, I was working, and I still felt like, you know, I'm never gonna get married, and who am I gonna marry, Mom? And I just remember sitting on my bed, just sad. And I got a phone call from Brian randomly, and I remember I was at a store with my mom, and he said, well, I'm in the Bay Area and I want to come and visit. And it was probably 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and that was the first visit that we really have had to sit down and talk to each other and really just reconnect. And it was nerve-wracking. I hadn't seen him in years. We were older. We were 22.
Oh, wow.
Older.
Well, you know.
Well, not quite 19, right?
Yeah,
it
we
had
weren't
been some
teenagers.
time. And
Yeah.
you know, Zach had talked about how relationships really suffer through a deployment and even after a deployment. That sometimes it's hard to stay connected when you're living in two different places and focused on two different things. You mentioned, you know, having friends and having a job, and he may be focused on, you know, what his mission is, and so you're kind of reconnecting these lives together, but you've had different experiences during that time period. How'd you connect? How'd you reconnect? Was it going back to the relationship that you used to have, or did you kind of reconnect on him in his new role as a Iraq War veteran and being injured, and you being kind of this caretaker, this natural kind of responsibility that you felt? I got to take care of things. I got to call everyone. How did you guys find a place to come back to each other?
Well, I mean, that really started in 2009. I mean, after he was injured in 07, we still lived our separate lives. I was still here. He was still in Southern California. He was doing a lot of therapy and pretty much just rebuilding himself at that time for over 07 and 08, and maybe a little bit towards the end of 09, or beginning of 09, I'm sorry. So we lived our separate lives. But then, like I said, he had called me in 2009. And what we picked back up definitely wasn't what we had before. I mean, we were younger, we were teenagers, so we were growing up. And he had told me that he had said this previously, that when he would get back, that we would get married.
Oh, wow.
And I believed him. I mean, he didn't lie to me. You know, I knew that, but I knew it wasn't going to happen right away.
Wow.
So when he got back, I think he was on leave at the time, so he wasn't completely out yet. He didn't retire until August of 09. So that we were still in that transition mode of paperwork, trying to get him out, getting his DD-214, things like that. So I was kind of his partner with that. We weren't married yet, but we were still. I guess we did kind of reconnect and started doing things together, just in a different way. You know, we were growing up, handling all of the business part of it, trying to help him get everything that he needed to retire.
Well, Monica, we just have a few minutes left, and I just want to ask a little bit about what gives you strength. You know, you're still fairly young, but you are now married. You and Brian were married, and so you're his wife, and he's your husband. And what gives you the strength to be a military spouse, or to be a caretaker, or just to be you? as a person who, at a very young age, have a lot more responsibilities than other people from your cohort?
I have a huge faith in God. I pray, we pray all of the time. I'm always in the Word, and it builds our relationship together. It helps me build my relationship with God, and with that, I mean, that's ultimately my #1 goal in my life, is to be right with God, and then my husband second. I mean, a lot of people put their spouses first, but I just know in my life and my faith, God comes first, my husband comes second, and everything will fall into place.
Yeah, you're really connecting to your spirituality, and that could be a very challenge for a very big challenge for people who have served in the military. And although there's chaplains and there's pastors who are in the military and there's churches in the community, a lot about the military service just kind of takes that spirituality out of a person when you have to focus on the fundamentals of survival, right? Of caring for a husband who has been wounded and caring for yourself and, you know, and your wounds. And you know, I want to acknowledge, and we haven't done so, that you know, the veteran serves, but the family member serves as well, and we have to honor that and appreciate that as best we can. We have to remind ourselves, I think, Kevin, you're a family member, so I'm really talking to myself here. Well, we have to remind ourselves as veterans to often consider the sacrifices of the family members, the sacrifices of fathers like yourself, Kevin, as a Gold Star father, and the sacrifices of you there, Monica, as a spouse. And I definitely want to appreciate and thank you for being on the show tonight.
Thank you.
And thank you for being so honest with your feelings and sharing those with our audience and with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
So we've mentioned some resources, very important resources tonight, like the Vet Center program and like unit cohesion and the VA. It was mentioned about the VA, and I know there's a lot of other
even
resources.
these books that we have here tonight.
These books, and we talked about the Vietnam veterans of Diablo Valley, and there's going to be an opportunity for our viewers tonight to take our discussions and to learn about some of the resources that we have available for veterans. Some of the great resources that I want to point out are the Concord Vet Center, located at 1333 Willow Pass Road, the Contra Costa County Veterans Service Office, located here at 10 Douglas Drive. The Contra Costa County Veterans Service Office also has a website at contracosta.ca.us, and you can call the Veterans Service Office at 313-1481. I also want to mention CalVet, a great agency that Kevin happens to work for. CalVet is our State Department of Veterans Affairs, and you can learn more about the California Department of Veterans Affairs at www.calvet.ca.gov. A local nonprofit organization that helps out severely wounded veterans. We've mentioned some veterans who have been wounded. We mentioned Monica's husband, Brian, and we mentioned Zach, and that wounds are not always physical, but a great organization, Sentinels of Freedom, at sentinelsoffreedom.org, works to care for our severely wounded veterans and helping them come home. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. It's been a great opportunity. This was a special 1-hour live segment, and we hope to have this chance again next month. Our next live show will be on the 3rd Monday at 7 p.m. This is Veterans Voices of Contra Costa County, wishing you all a good evening. Thank you for serving.